Hi there, welcome to our THE Campus webinar looking at how to embed the Sustainable Development Goals into your online teaching and learning. I'm Miranda Prynne, Content Curator for THE Campus, where we share peer-to-peer advice and best practice in online teaching and learning from academics all over the world. I'm here with Fernando Reimers, who is the Ford Foundation Professor of the Practice in International Education and Director of the Global Education Innovation Initiative at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Natalie Kopytko, who is a lecturer at the Sustainability Research Institute at the University of Leeds. And Tara Ivanochko, who is Director of Environmental Science and Academic Director of the Sustainability Initiative at the University of British Columbia. So welcome to our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And on to today's topic, harnessing online teaching to advance the aims of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We all know the world faces many post-COVID challenges, but there can be little doubt those highlighted by the SDGs, such as global warming, destruction of the natural environment, and inequality, are among the biggest crises faced by humanity. Universities, with their unique role as educators and research centres, can be powerful vehicles for change, and many would argue have a duty to do so as part of their civic responsibilities. So we'd like to explore how the recent upheaval of higher education to more digital and remote teaching models could be used to accelerate this. But before we delve into the impact of online specifically, the first thing I'd like to ask everyone on the panel is what role they feel universities should be playing in helping us achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Is it becoming more important to do so? And is it becoming more important to sort of demonstrate this work? Fernando, perhaps you could start us off.
I'm happy to do that, Miranda. I'm delighted to be with Natalie and Tara on this panel, and also very appreciative of this initiative of the Times Higher Education to convene leaders of thought and practice of higher education at this particular time. I think that universities' core mission of advancing knowledge through research, educating students, and outreach can be wonderfully integrated in service of achieving the goals. In fact, I would argue that it is when we embrace the proposition that universities have a critical role to play in building a world that is sustainable, that these three missions of the university become better integrated. And I think that there are a number of reasons why it is important for universities not only to do that and to become intentional in doing so and to making visible that they do that. One of them is that in many places around the world, including the US, societies are asking themselves, what good do universities do for societies? It is to some extent sad for an academic that we should be living such a times, but the fact is that in public opinion polls in the United States, when representative samples of adults are asked, do you think that on balance, universities make positive contributions to society? The percentage of people who respond in the affirmative has declined precipitously in the last 5 years. And I think this has something to do with the fragmentation and inequality that is being caused by globalization, that is causing many people who feel left out and excluded. What is it that these institutions do for society? Well, institutions do a lot of good for society. They do a lot of good in terms of building a world without poverty, but they should actually be intentional in doing it. They should make sure they are doing it, and they should make it visible to all its constituencies that they do. The second reason why it is important for universities to do that is that in terms of their teaching mission, to prepare students for a world that is volatile, complex, and uncertain, can be done very well when we engage students while they're being educated in thinking about these goals and in actually not contemplating the goals, but actually making tangible contributions to advancing them. And I think certainly in terms of its research mission, research in some domains, at least, is much better done when it brings together different parts of the university, different areas of the university that are too often fragmented, and engaging with real problems, whether the problem is producing a world without poverty, addressing climate change, advancing gender equality, is a wonderful way to bring together areas of inquiry that are typically conducted in places of the university that are really far apart from one another. So I think for those three reasons, to embrace outreach, to do education better, and to do a better job at advancing knowledge, it is essential to the university to do that. To look at these from the point of view of society, why should universities do that? I would argue because there is no better institution equipped to do this than university. In fact, I want to submit that none of these goals will be achieved. This world will not be achieved unless universities take them on as part of their mission. I wish it were differently, because it is going to take some effort on the part of leaders of universities to move them in direction of being more intentional in pursuing these. But I don't see how we get to a world that is inclusive, where we all belong, in which we relate to the earth in a way that is sustainable, if we don't mobilize the power of these remarkable institutions tasked with advancing knowledge, tasked with educating people, and tasked with educating all of society. So I think both for reasons that are good for the university and that are good for society, it is imperative. And I'm just delighted that the Times Higher Education has convened this conversation to cause leaders to ask the question not of whether we should do this, but how do we do this more effectively? We have more than 30,000 institutions of higher education in the world. If we could actually engage in collecting leadership, in mobilizing them, and in collaborating across institutions in service of these goals, we can absolutely achieve this world.
Thank you. Natalie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that was very comprehensive. Thank you for that, Fernando. Yeah, a few things, because again, with like looking at what role should universities play, I absolutely agree. Universities should be leaders, and I can't think of an institution that's better equipped to be a leader. We have things like on our campus, we have a living lab where students can submit projects and work on research. So there's the whole idea that a university is a mini city. And so whatever we can do in universities as sustainability projects that also educate students, get them working on real life problems, something that you can show to the community that, yes, we aren't just studying, theoretical ideas, we're working on real issues. So that's part of the outreach. And then of course that could be scaled up for cities to become more sustainable. So there's that we have the human resources too. So we have so many students that are wanting to learn, wanting to apply their knowledge to real world problems.
Tara, what are your thoughts on the role of universities here?
Thank you. Yes. Once again, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel and have this discussion. I think this is a really important way that we can demonstrate essentially the role of universities, is by collaborative conversations where we can all agree on the outcome, but maybe discuss some of the ways that we get there, and some of them will be different in different places. So much of the conversation has already been, so topics have already been brought up. Maybe to just elaborate on some of those, I think that, again, a university is an institution who strives to take a leadership role, usually in most communities, and therefore wants to be seen as demonstrating what our goals might look like. And so one of the ways that we can do that is opportunities through Campus as a Living Lab, but also even looking beyond the campus and thinking about taking that collaborative relationship outside of the university borders. So there's, again, maybe at different levels, there's the research intensive universities, and then the education focused universities, and community college level higher institutions. And each ones might have a unique role to play in research or teaching or outreach. And so the balance between all three of them might be slightly different. But for a university like UBC, a research intensive university that cares deeply about education, we're hoping to also expand and engage with the community in a way that we haven't been doing lately, which will demonstrate that reciprocal relationship and integrate, not only showing that the research that we're doing on campus is relevant to the community, but that the ideas of the community are relevant to the university. So really trying to integrate more deeply and demonstrate what sustainable relationships might look like.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, bearing all of that in mind, all incredibly good points, I suppose what then does the move towards more digital provision and remote learning in higher education, what impact does that potentially have? Does it help drive progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals? And if so, which ones specifically? Natalie, do you have sort of any thoughts on this?
I can't really think that it drives any of them specifically. There's been both challenges, and sometimes it's easier to see the challenges. And then it has occurred to me that actually with moving to online, there's been a lot of meetings that happen that might not have happened if we weren't online, because we wouldn't think that we had the time to do it, and because we didn't regularly have online meetings before. So with these collaborations with even Leeds United, I'm speaking to the person on Friday about future projects students might do. And I think maybe that might have actually become brushed aside, because I wouldn't have thought of just saying, do you want to have a quick chat on Teams? Which it sounds very insignificant, but in some ways, online collaboration has always been such a challenge, and nobody ever prioritized it or wanted to put the effort in. So even with teaching my students the module Sustainable Development in Practice, prior to the lockdown, I said, I'm going to teach you some tips on online collaboration, because it's very hard to collaborate with people online. And sometimes you need to do it, and sometimes people don't have the technical skills to do it. So I was like, I want to send you out in the world better than some of the collaborations I've experienced. So preparing the students for that. And then it turned out that we ended up having lockdowns so that the students did really need it. So it demonstrated it clearly, but it's always been a challenge, because I've worked quite a bit in countries and in rural areas where they don't have strong Wi-Fi. And so that's also always been the challenge, and trying to find a way past that other than getting the investment into the infrastructure. And it's not just developing countries, rural communities in Canada and the UK have poor Wi-Fi. So that's where it's a real challenge with achieving sustainable development goals and doing collaboration because of that barrier at the moment. So I'm just hoping that investment improves because of what we've been through, and it's seen more widely.
Yeah, and we will actually come on to sort of, I suppose, how best to kind of approach that inequality of sort of, you know, communication, access, technology, and the various problems associated with it. Just sticking with this kind of issue of online learning per se, Fernando, what do you think? Do you think online learning at your institution has in any way helped kind of drive progress towards the SDGs?
Yeah, greatly in two ways. Let me first build on the point that was just made by Natalie, because I agree that the fact that we're now conducting a lot more of our business remotely, that this is the new normal, has allowed us to do things differently. So I'll give you an example. I lead a research collaborative with colleagues in a number of countries, a couple of dozen countries, called the Global Education Innovation Initiative. The way we used to do our work is we would meet in person, we would plan studies, we had a whole agenda plan when this pandemic was declared, and it became evident that we couldn't do what we were going to do. But instead, rather than waiting for the pandemic to pass, we asked, how can we be helpful to this moment? And so our mission is basically to generate knowledge that helps to transform public education systems. We said, well, the question of the moment is, how do we provide guidance to education leaders? And we did three things completely online. One is we built a partnership with the OECD, the World Bank, and an NGO in Finland, documenting examples, many cases of innovative practices to sustain educational opportunity during the pandemic. In 6 months, we had done 100 of those in a very unorthodox and different way to the way we normally plan studies. But the OECD tells me it is the most visited website that they have on their education group. The second thing we did was to conduct a study, a comparative study of the impact of education, of COVID on education, and the impact of the policies that were adopted in place. And we have a book manuscript that is now under peer review by an academic publisher that was done without a single in-face meeting. All this work was done online. Why was it possible? Each of my collaborators in the 25 countries is in the countries where we're conducting the study. The third thing we did was a comparative study of the role of universities partnering with education systems for the purpose of helping to sustain education during the pandemic. And we have, this one is already an accepted book for publication with an academic publisher, 20 different countries, which are about the role of universities in connecting with the larger education ecosystem during the pandemic. And all of this was done online. And frankly, if we hadn't had the urgency of asking ourselves, A, how can we be helpful in the moment? And B, it's so easy. to now meet online, I don't know that we would have done it. But in terms of teaching also, Harvard for the first time in its history approved, the Harvard Corporation approved that we would give graduate degrees to people who took their entire studies online. We had never done that. I will confess for full disclosure that I have been curious about online education, and I have been a supporter of online education for a decade. And I have tried to persuade my colleagues that we should offer online degrees, only to be told this is never going to happen, not in this institution. Well, it took a week, the first week of the pandemic, for the Harvard Corporation, this is the body of 7 people who govern this university, to say you can do that now. And the consequence has been phenomenal, because we have admitted students. I have among my students former secretaries of education, leaders of NGOs, people who already hold the positions that my traditional students aspired to hold. And they're mixed together with my more traditional students. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? That we do very interesting things. I'll give you just 2 examples. In my course on education policy this year, and I engaged my students as consultants to various education authorities around the world. And their task was, this is a course on education policy. You're going to learn policy by having a practicum in policy where you become a thought partner as a team to an education authority in a country, examining the impact of COVID on education and helping them figure out ways to sustain education opportunity. We published this book just 2 weeks ago, was presented at a meeting of ministers of education organized by UNESCO, 100 ministers. In 2 weeks of publication, more than 4,000 people have read this book. I haven't had that experience before, where something that I've done is picked up by 4,000 people within 2 weeks of publication. And I think this has a lot to do, of course, with the moment. I mean, this is relevant knowledge to the moment, but it also has to do with how online education created new opportunities for us to be useful to society, to connect what we do in the teaching to society. Now, I don't think we need a pandemic to do that. I'm hoping that when we achieve herd immunity and we realize that we actually enjoy meeting face-to-face, and maybe we will not be doing all of our meetings online, although frankly, I hope that we continue having some of them online, we can continue to do some of those things. In that same course, for example, and back to the question of ENGs on ed policy the previous year, I had engaged my students in connecting with educational institutions for the purpose of helping to develop a curriculum that helps develop the skills to adapt to, mitigate, and revert climate change. And of course, this is not work that can be done in the library in Cambridge or sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This has to be done in partnership. So to build on a point that Tara made earlier in the previous round, that building collaborations with institutions outside the university is one of the ways to achieve these goals. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that we couldn't do that without, it'd be much harder to do that without technology. So I do think that this moment that has immersed us, it has been sink or swim in having to do most of our work virtually, has really created some silver linings, has helped us see possibilities we didn't recognize before. And frankly, I hope we take the time to take stock of that innovation dividend generated by the pandemic for the university, and that we don't lose it, I frankly would much rather have faculty meetings online, because I can actually get some of the work done while the meetings are happening.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something a lot of people can identify with. I mean, I think this message of collaboration and basically the opportunity created by online tools for collaboration is coming through sort of loud and clear here. Just lastly, Tara, what effect do you think the move to online learning has had on work to tackle major global challenges such as, fighting poverty, hunger, protecting biodiversity, and so on, whether at your institution or kind of higher education generally?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take a step back to the original and think about this shift to online as the driver. And I would question whether that's what we want it to be. I don't know if we want technology to be the driver. I think what we want are to be looking at the challenges that we need to address and finding the right ways to address them. And some of those things can be addressed through technology and some cannot. So rather than thinking about, we have a tool, what can we do with the tool, and spreading this tool throughout everything that we're doing, I think we might want to look at it a different way and think about where are the places where the tool will be useful to us and help us make progress on challenges that we're otherwise not able to do through other ways. Or if we're switching to using this tool, why are we switching? And what are the benefits of doing that? And what are we losing from doing that? And a little bit of a playoff between both of those things. So in the case of research, the evidence is strong that collaboration at that high level, when we have experts in the field able to efficiently organize and connect in and do their work online, that has really been beneficial. And we've seen all sorts of new collaborations or more efficient collaborations, opportunities to engage in individuals who otherwise would not have been participating because their voice was maybe, I mean, one of the things with online perhaps is dealing with time change, but we can even manage that, right? So the four of us are here together now around the world. And being the one who's up at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's not so bad. But I do see being thrown into this. So with the experience of having my university education switch to online, I see pros and cons to that. I see aspects of the class that were enhanced, opportunities maybe for bringing in guests or engagement with new communities, that being a real strength of the opportunity to be working online. But I also see some detriments to that. And Natalie mentioned student well-being earlier, and that is one that it's not the same type of community. It's not the same type of engagement within the classroom. And as we know, the full day working on screens in itself is not necessarily beneficial for well-being. So we want to think about the balance of those things. And then at education at the younger level, I'm a mother here with 2 children who've now been thrown into aspects of online learning, one at grade 4 and one at grade 8. And I see some problems with that at the younger level. So I think really it depends on where you're engaging, what level you're engaging, and what you're doing with that technology, whether it's consciously purposeful or whether it's a response because of a global pandemic, right? That's not, to me, the reason to engage, in online education. Online education should be done well, and that to me is the nub. What can we do that we understand is excellent education, excellence in research, and how do we use the technology to help us advance those? And within sustainability, again, aspects of that being maybe connecting. So this is not so much with the online technology, but with technologies overall. I'm working on a lot of projects in relation to data science and making access to data visualizations much more accessible to students at a variety of different levels. And so the technologies there allow students to see elements of the natural world, engage in data sets in ways that are extremely difficult to do without the opportunity for online education or sort of technological support within the classroom. And open source education and open source resources, again, are one of the ways where we can then not only do it for our own students at an institution like UBC, but to share that with institutions elsewhere, again, who may not have the resources to build those things themselves, or benefit from the collaborations with experts in fields that maybe they don't have topic specialists within. So that kind of sharing, open resources, technological support for certain kinds of, in my case, would be data visualizations or data engagement, is extremely relevant. But there's definitely aspects that I see as lacking or missing when we are fully online. And I'm looking forward to maybe the breadth that we can take post-pandemic and think about what aspects of our learning, teaching and learning are really heightened and benefit from the online environment and which don't, and make sure that we make the choices as opposed to having been thrown in and have everything there.
Could I ask a follow-up question of Tara?
Yeah,
because we wrestle with the very issues that you asked, but I wonder if, in addition to the question of, for the students that we used to serve, what are the pros and the cons of online? Another question should also be, who can we now serve because we do online? Because to me, that's the main benefit that I see, is that in the way in which we used to do things in a very selective institution, there is a lot of privilege involved in our traditional model that suppose that people can extricate themselves from their lives and commitments and come to Harvard for a period. And now we have removed that barrier and we're including a very different population. But I'm curious on your thoughts on those two questions and how you
Yes.
would weigh them. Yeah.
I do, and I weigh them. I see benefits of those, and again at UBC at the Sustainability Initiative, where I'm academic director, we're now looking at how do we invite in those who would not otherwise be able to participate in the types of activities that we run, the student engagement activities. We're now looking at, well, maybe it makes sense to have a cohort online for those who would not otherwise be able to be here, but. Again, what do we gain from doing that? Maybe access to new groups of students and being able to spread outside, but what do we lose in doing that? And how do we make sure that we're understanding both of those things at the same time? But I definitely I recognize for institutions like Harvard, like UBC, where I really see have the opportunity, the responsibility to share our knowledge, our resources, our capacity with communities that really pay into the system of we are a public university. And so we have a responsibility to engage as many and as broadly as we can. But again, I think you in each instance, you want to think, why am I doing this? What is the benefit of doing this? What am I losing by doing this? What other ways could I be doing this? And have a fulsome conversation as you are developing your programming.
I might just jump in here.
Is it okay if...
Sorry, Natalie, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to mention that there was a couple of things, especially on this idea of privilege. So one of the nice things, well, I don't know if I should say nice, about getting thrown in the deep end is that we could see now people have the will because they feel more apt. They have the ability to use technology now there where they didn't. And you can see some of the benefits that you wouldn't have always seen. So one of the things that we have been doing is virtual field trips. And I work with a colleague on quite a few field trips. And we went to the site and we filmed walking down this hillside for natural flood management. And I said to her, this occurs to me how inaccessible our field trips are. And so I'm really hoping that we can have some hybrid models going forward, because of course that's an SDG in itself, right? To have that type of engagement. And so have the option for students who can and want to go to the site that they can go to the site. And for those who can't, especially even students with anxiety, all sorts of different issues where it wasn't accessible, even though we were trying our hardest to be accessible, that these virtual field trips do give us options and reach more people. I also have one student, because we have as my personal tutee, and she said to me, actually, online learning works very well for me. Because she's a commuter and she lives at home and her parents are both in the medical field. So she's able to help out with the home more because she doesn't have that commuting problem. And she would sometimes come to Leeds for her lecture to find out it was canceled. And so a whole trip was wasted. So I'm really looking forward to moving forward and having the hybrid model where we can have some online where we can see that it really provides a benefit and widens the participation. And still have face-to-face like everybody else, I think.
Very briefly expanding on that, and actually I was about to come on to this sort of exact topic really of tackling the sort of inequalities and widening diversity of access to education. And I think you've all very successfully touched upon the fact that, online and digital sort of channels offer an opportunity to do that. However, there were actually a lot of concerns expressed during the move to online learning that it might widen inequalities in education and set back diversity work due to the things you touched on earlier, Natalie, that not everyone does have access to decent technology or a decent Wi-Fi connection. Some people have very challenging working environments at home, communications issues, and so much more. I think any of the three of you would have ideas on this, but actually, Fernando, I'm interested just because of the project actually that you talked about with your education policy students who I know kind of looked at how to, in effect, sort of offer online education successfully. Yeah. Did they look to address this? What were the sort of solutions that emerged?
Undoubtedly, the use of online for basic education, for universal education, has widened inequalities and has many challenges, honestly. I've been looking for silver linings, but there's a reason why we titled this book An Educational Calamity. There are many things that the public school, the brick and mortar school, does that we don't know how to do online, that I don't think we can replace with online. There were many things that were really irresponsible that used to be said before that I hope will have more humility now. For example, there's a very famous talk by Sugata Mitra around essentially poo-pooing the public schools, saying, you know, we could abolish them. Just give a kid a computer, they'll teach themselves anything they need to. Well, we now know that's a lie. That's a lie that is unsupported by evidence. If anything will come of this, I think will be greater appreciation for the benefits of meeting in person. Across generations, for the benefits of interaction, for the benefits of the many things that you learn other than access to knowledge and academic content. Having said that, in terms of what online did to universities, I think the answer is slightly different. If you look at the question of those that are already included in higher education, which is a minority of the world population of high school graduates, it's quite possible, although I haven't studied that directly, that you would see the same heightened inequalities. Not everybody has the same circumstances, both in terms of the skills that are necessary to learn independently and with less guidance, or even the same life circumstances that allow you the space and the technology to study. But I think that that question needs to be balanced with another question. In terms of those who did not have access to higher education, what has the greater reliance on technology done? And I think there, technology gives us a big opportunity to include many more, both in our formal education programs, in extension activities, and in just greater outreach, greater connection with the community. And I believe that if there is one lesson I hope we learn from this pandemic has made visible the enormous inequalities that exist within our societies. They're huge, and they were hidden. They were hidden inside people's homes. Now we know about them. I think the university would do very well to embrace that as a challenge that it's going to try to address as part of its mission, not as somebody else's problem, but as a university's problem. Because I think, frankly, this very harmful populist movement that is moving around the world that sees universities as elite institutions disconnected from society, not answering the plea of the common person, has its root in a certain neglect on the part of university on the importance of that question. And I think that even elite institutions such as Harvard University and others would do very well to look at the problem of inequality and ask, what am I doing about that problem? And how am I embracing that? And I think on that issue, online, not only online education for our formal degree programs, but online outreach, online engagement with our communities gives us an opportunity to be more intentional and more effective in demonstrating that we're not strangers to this problem of inequality, that we care deeply. And I think that this is my own field, education. One of the ways in which universities can do that is connect with public schools, connect with education systems. That's why I conducted that study. Universities have a lot to offer. University is the modern research university, established in 1811 by William Humboldt, was established at the same time that the main public education systems were established and at the same time that democracies emerged. And these three institutions of the Enlightenment are, by definition, they all have their roots in the same philosophical movement, were designed to be sister twins. And none of them works very well when the other two do not, or one doesn't work. It's the reason autocrats don't like universities and try to destroy them. It's the reason you see that time and again. And so I think that rediscovering the connection between universities and public education and education for everybody is, I hope, one of the silver linings of this pandemic. And I think around, just to conclude, around the SDGs, if there is one thing that universities can do in service of public education, is help develop high quality curriculum aligned with the SDGs and help develop high quality programs of professional development for teachers so they do a better job. And that I've done that with my students. We have developed a curriculum that is in use in thousands of schools around the world. And it takes some effort, but if one professor can do that with his students, if we could get more of the 30,000 universities around the world to say, you know what, that's going to be something that matters to us. That's going to be something that we pay attention to. That's going to be something that we support. This shouldn't be a matter of an individual initiative of some faculty members. This is part of the social responsibility of the universities. I think this could be a game changer to come out of this pandemic with a greater collaboration between universities and public education systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Sorry, Miranda. I mean, we might slow you down because you've got 3 university people here, so we're not going to be able to go through without deeply engaging with each other as we go. I'm wondering about the role. So I understand that, and I really celebrate that aspect of the potential of what we have. But I also wonder about the university, particularly with strong sustainability mandates and coming from the UBC Sustainability Initiative, thinking about what our role is at the university as being advocates for equality, not only in showing and saying what has to happen, but actually pushing governments around the world to understand and maybe think about things like, if technology or if the internet and access to the internet is going to be so critical for education, then maybe it should not be in the hands of private companies. Maybe it is a service that governments really need to start taking control of. In that sense, then we would have opportunities for looking at equality, looking at access, and putting that in the responsibility and accountability of governments, as opposed to the private corporations that will make decisions for their own profit. So we might be thinking about, how does the university advocate then, if it's so obvious that online education is going to be a game changer in helping us achieve some of these global goals and sustainability development goals? We need to be thinking about the mechanisms that help us get there as well.
Yeah, so just to add one point onto that, because I had started thinking about this too with research and trying to do collaborative research in countries like India or Ukraine, where they don't have strong Wi-Fi. I think to myself, that should go in the research funding to get some funding to improve their Wi-Fi. So that's just something else to add on about getting funding for getting that service that's so needed now.
Yeah,
I wanted to add some nuance. I am fundamentally in agreement with the point Tara made, that universities should be places out of which ideas could shape the commons, the public commons. I don't think it should be universities, as in the president of the university, advocating for any issues. I think there should be very few issues on which university presidents could commit the university to a position. One of them would be, obviously, if there is any effort on the part of the government to restrict freedom, academic freedom in universities. That is an issue that is the essence of the university. But for example, on the issue of, should internet be a human right? I think the universities should be places that out of which faculty members have the university platform to illuminate those public issues. But I would rather keep the administration and the leadership of the university out of that, because I think it's a very dangerous path for academic freedom to have institutional positions on any issue, or to need the approval of the governing boards of the universities to be on an issue. So I think we're fundamentally in agreement. But
yeah, sorry, I wasn't suggesting it be the upper administration of the university, but really more that the university be accentuating, allowing these conversations now around these areas that challenge what it might mean to move something like online learning into a space that helps reduce inequalities.
Absolutely.
Could I just want to move us on, because I'm aware we do have a lot to try and get through, and we've actually only got less than 20 minutes to go now. So one of the things that I actually, just on a very quick practical level, wanted to ask, maybe you, Natalie, could sort of speak on this, is there was a big assumption made, I think, that online learning would kind of automatically reduce carbon footprints due to, the obvious things like reduced travel and so on. But actually, there has been research showing that it does not do that. There are still sort of almost equal emissions, just through different means of people in their own homes using the same amount of energy. Just wondered, I realised this is sort of, a lot in part the role of sort of more the university sort of management side. But would you have any thoughts as to what universities can do on a more micro level at the institution, just to use remote learning really as a tool to really push their own kind of environmental credentials and reduce their carbon footprint?
There's I've noticed this in myself now too, after it being brought up. Probably we need to do some sort of education campaign about working at home. It's interesting because right now I'm really bundled up in my house. And if I was working at the university, I would have done a strenuous commute in and would be in a short sleeve shirt, even though it's cold weather. And I've noticed some bad habits I'm picking up, like leaving my computer on, whereas I never would have before. I would always shut it off at the end of the day. And I think that has a lot to do with our work-life balance kind of being thrown into turmoil. So I'm thinking that we do need to do something more active at the university as a campaign, as working from home and reminding people, because when you're on campus, there's something central in your system that you're more aware of your behavior. And I think the only thing I can think from that is that we need to start campaigning about it, because our travel, our carbon emissions is tracked for travel, but when you're working from home, it isn't. And I think the other issue is probably that the buildings are still on, but the capacity is lessened. So again, and then some of us that aren't working there who would be running the sustainability campaigns aren't there to monitor behavior. So this is something like the research is new, so we're still just kind of thinking it over, but building that into our education campaigns at the staff level is probably what we need to do, because at least at my university, we don't have much in the way of students. We have postgrads that are there. So that's the only kind of solution that I can see, that we need to rework our sustainability campaigns due to this new thing that's happened.
Yeah, and then moving on to, I suppose, the sort of wider view of sustainability. I mean, Tara, how do you think universities can sort of embed sustainability and sustainability practices into their curricula across the board? Does online teaching present any opportunity here?
Yeah, again, so at UBC, we have been working for now decades to embed sustainability throughout the offerings across the university. We've been developing out pathways of sustainability, and we're doing that with the USI, the UBC Sustainability Initiative, as sort of the enabling hub that allows interested educators to come together. We provide resources, we provide some funding opportunities for those in different faculties and different departments across the university, discipline experts to engage in developing out these sustainability pathways. So by providing resources and an opportunity for people to come together, educators to come together, we're building essentially a community of practice that then does the work themselves in their respective disciplines. We also provide opportunities for right now, because UBC has declared a climate emergency, and in response to the climate emergency, there has been resources mobilized. And so we're providing education grants or focused on curriculum renewal and courses that want to either bring in climate change content or update, renew their engagement with climate change through these education grants. We also have programming that, again, this idea of connecting with the community. We have programming that supports, through partnerships, graduate students working with community off campus. So summer internships that really focus on climate change, sustainability, well-being, other aspects of poverty within our communities. So we have partnerships with the municipal governments, with institutions like our BC Hydro, our energy corporations, and more recently now with some extra support from the university for different NGOs, non-governmental organizations who don't have the capacity to support that type of research themselves. And so we are now paying for the internships that our students can have within those community organizations. So we have approximately 100 grad students this year who are now working in the community. And that's one way that we are building out this sustainability, embedding it through undergraduate education, through faculty engagement, and through graduate research opportunities. And maybe a last example of how we're doing that right now is actually by pulling together a group of experts on climate change mainly graduate students, and building a system that allows the instructors on campus to invite a climate change expert into their classroom. So we now have this coordinated system where the graduate students have built out some kind of educational activity or engaged lecture where they will then bring it into a classroom of someone who requests them. And the USI, the organization unit that I'm with, will actually compensate that graduate student for the time that they are putting into somebody else's classroom.
Brilliant, thank you. Just moving on to international collaboration, because that's sort of been touched on. Fernando, I wanted to ask you, where it comes to the opportunities created by sort of digital technology for international collaboration and kind of cross-border education. Obviously, on one hand, this is as has been said, a fantastic opportunity, but how do you feel, how can this be managed so that it actually does benefit all the sort of countries involved and it doesn't end up being a sort of, you know, brain drain or just a sort of vehicle for greater influence of sort of Western institutions? Do you think it needs quite careful management to make sure the benefits do lie sort of spread across the board where they should be?
My answer is there is probably low-hanging fruit. If there's been a phenomenal development, let's go back to 1947, when the UN was established as sort of the main body to allow international collaboration. Compare the world 75 years later to that world. The big difference is in the number of universities that have emerged during that period. So this infrastructure of 30,000 institutions was all built in those 75 years. The institutions that predated that time are a minority of those 30,000. And I think the opportunity to create collaborations among those institutions, the older and the newer ones, can help this infrastructure reach a next level of impact and effectiveness that would be very beneficial for everybody involved. Having said that, there are tremendous imbalances across institutions in terms of the resources that they have, the capacities that they have, even the risks that they face in their own societies. I have freedoms as an academic in the United States that many of my peers in other countries do not have to speak even about the very issues that we are addressing today. And I think those imbalances should concern us all in the university community. We should be seeing ourselves as members of a community where it's in our interest to help all the other members. Just like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was a brilliant invention that showed us that none of us can achieve our humanity unless we engage in helping others achieve their humanity, that we are interdependent in that way. I think all universities are also interdependent in the same way, and we should really collaborate. It's in our collective interest to do that. I don't know that I can't imagine what kind of governing body would manage this thing carefully. So I'm skeptical of supra bodies. I'm particularly skeptical of university administrators trying to manage this process. I think that this array of institutions that has been created and the opportunities that exist for collaboration can help us address many of the challenges that we have discussed right now. I'll give you an example. To a point that was mentioned earlier on the university kind of becoming a place that can advocate for important issues. One of the issues that is very serious around societies basically has to do with the financial management of resources in the society. So the United States experienced a terrible shock in 2008 because of some, frankly, mismanagement of financial institutions like Goldman Sachs and others, who I think were held to account to some extent. Now, similar issues happen in other societies. Let me take Iceland as an example. In Iceland, as in the United States, Congress commissioned an inquiry to understand what had happened, and they produced a report, sort of like a truth commission, what happened here, just as in the US. One big difference is that in Iceland, the main public university took that report and made it a matter of debate within the university community. It made sure that everybody engaged in the conversation because they understood that the people who basically had betrayed the trust of society and had caused that crisis were graduates of the university. I don't know how many universities in the United States of America did the same thing with our reports. And I think that's an important question. To what extent is the freedom of universities to exercise their social responsibility being curtailed by the tangled web of interests that engage the universities with the powers that be in different societies? So that's an issue we should be addressing. And of course, those very issues, if they exist in North America, I can assure you, they exist in Saudi Arabia, they exist in Turkey, they exist greatly in a country like China. And so I'm not looking for a grand solution managed by any kind of UN body, but I do think that technology gives academics in all these universities the opportunity to communicate and to support one another and to really exercise collective leadership, which I think is what we need. If there is one thing that I hope we'll see coming out of this crisis, is greater responsibility and upstanding on the part of faculty members to do our job. In many places, faculty have been emasculated from the job of being faculty by an industry that has become too much of a business and not an academic community. And I'm hoping that this is part of what we revision in this time of crisis. To the question of sustainability, I do think universities do some things well and some things they do very poorly. What they do well is they have the aspiration of being sustainable campuses in terms of our carbon footprint. I commend that. I think it's incredibly important. They also conduct wonderful research. For the students who are so motivated, they educate them. But if I were to sum up a lot of the efforts of universities, I would say they are geared towards promoting individual responsibility for a different form of consumption, rather than to develop the capacities that are necessary for collective collaboration to change systems, which is what we need. If we all consume responsibly, we will not address the targets of the International Panel on Climate Change. We will have to reinvent our way of life with circular economies, with different patterns of production, of consumption. That can happen in the university. But it's not going to happen if the only place in the university that deals with climate change is the chemistry department, the physics department, the biology department. You need to engage the entire campus in thinking through what does it mean to reinvent society and what are the capacities of our students. And it's not enough to say that a fragment of our students become educated on climate change. I think a very fair question should be, how many university graduates at the undergraduate level have taken the time to read the reports of the International Panel on Climate Change and to ask themselves, what does that mean for me, for how I live my life, and for what I'm going to do with my life? And so it is a big conversation. I think this is a crucible moment for universities. Are we going to take ourselves seriously, historically? Do we understand the crisis that the world is in, which I think is a lot a crisis of sustainability, of climate change? And are we willing to be up standards, or are we going to let this crisis pass by? Universities have a different time. I'm in love with universities. I think they're a great invention of societies after public schools, but they haven't always done the right thing. I think there have been times when universities have stood up for the right things, and there have been times, as in the time of Germany's breakdown of democracy during Hitler, when most academics frankly pretended it wasn't their problem, when faculty members were required to become members of the Nazi Party. And when they were required, it was too late. Many of their colleagues were in concentration camps when they realized what was coming. So I hope we will take notice of the moment we're in, and faculty members will do the right thing.
So
Hey,
just
Miranda.
to, I'm afraid we've literally only got about 3 minutes left. So I just really want to get to this last point to give each of you a sort of moment to wrap up. And actually, Fernando, I feel like what you just have sort of, the info you've just shared really, really kind of naturally brings us to this, which is I'd just love to ask each of you as a sort of final bit of insight, what you think, rebuilding, or arguably rebuilding post-pandemic, how can universities sort of put the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainability, at really the centre of their kind of core purpose, whether that is through delivery models, through, who they are serving, what is in their curricula. What would be your sort of key focus in how they could go about doing this? Natalie, do you want to go first? And feel free to share whatever it was you wanted to quickly say.
Oh yeah, sure thing. Thank you. Oh, I was just going to add one thing that would be really great is if we did more PhD collaborations where we had PhD students from, say, India with the university and did a co-supervision type thing. So we're not doing the brain drain And we're not contributing to carbon emissions by flying our research students to those countries to do work. So that would be brilliant if we could start partnering with other universities and other countries to co-supervise PhD students. I could see that as a lot of wins, and I could see it as becoming an admin nightmare as well. So that's where I was piggybacking on what Fernando was saying. And of course, because I teach sustainability, I probably have too many ideas to do this quickly. And Leeds, in fact, does have the SDGs as kind of a core issue, and how they're addressing it and how they focus their research and their education and work with the community. So just as an idea of building it into the curricula, this year for our induction week field trip, my colleague was working on most of it and I was the technical help. So we did a virtual field trip with sustainability services, and we had our students, and again, this worked with, if you don't have a great internet connection too, this is something that could work, because we had a presentation from the different people from the sustainability services give a talk on what their issue was. We had group work, which I highly recommend for building into the curricula, because sustainability can become very overwhelming. So it's good if students have each other as support. So we had group work online. They had different projects. So one group was plastic consumption, one was engaging with the community. So we introduced the students to the problems. We introduced them to what the campus was doing. We had them work on a few different research questions. We included on what can you do with this as a student? What could your role be? And then we brought in second and third year students to talk to them a little bit about what it's like being a student and what they could potentially do. So in that way you introduce them, and this is something that we're trying with our students, and it's hopefully going to be something that will be with all the students. So it'll be the induction week activity across the board. So that's great to get the students right in the first week, interest in sustainability, knowing what's going on campus. And then they did presentations at the end, and they actually got carried away on the presentations. So that was really great. They were very engaged in it. It allowed them to meet each other, and they didn't have to be online the whole time. So they talked about what they were going to do and went off. So that's something I would recommend. And our sustainability services also help students with dissertation projects. So even introducing that to them, and then finding out how that fits with the disciplines, because of course there's everything from engineering. So getting that in right at the beginning and working with it.
Great, thank you. Tara and Fernando, just to let you know, we really do need to wrap up in sort of a minute or two. So just quickly, what would be, Tara, one key thing you think universities could look to do to really bring SDGs to the centre and heart of their purpose?
Right. So I guess what I would say is the vision of the university can trickle down if the right systems are in place. And so by bringing in plans at the upper level. So again, at UBC, we have our climate emergency response right now. There's been a task force that has made recommendations. There's also been an Indigenous strategic plan. And those two have been considered in concert with one another to see how they complement and what aspects of these two plans come together. There's a 20-year sustainability strategy and the climate action plan looking more at operations. So all of these things at a university level are really actually driving us towards achievements that would fall within the sustainability development goals. And so then by having those as vision documents within the university, and then some kind of structures in place, so faculty who are bringing sustainability into their classes or engaging in ways that indigenize their curriculum would get recognized through merit or promotional structures that demonstrate that this work is really important.
Great, thank you. And Fernando, do you want to wrap it up?
Here's a real simple thing. Every year when I welcome my students in a master's program I direct, I give them this postcard and I tell them, study these goals and ask yourself, what capacities do you need to develop so you can help advance them, and why? And come back to them often. My answer is empower the students. Give the students opportunities to start while they are students, figuring out a way to advance those goals, because if you change the students and their motivations and their incentives, they will cause us, the faculty and the institution, to change in response to that. So give more voice to the students and give them this is basically an ethical framework. Universities need to remember that at the core of our mission is to develop the ethical sensibilities of our students. And I can think of no better ethical framework than one that says, how do we build a world in which we all belong? We treat each other in a way that doesn't exercise violence, that makes it possible to respect the dignity of every person. And we treat this planet in a way so that there is a planet to go around for some time.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you for taking part in today's discussion. It has been absolutely fantastic, really interesting points raised. We could talk, I think, for another hour, but we can't on this occasion. So just thank you so much. And we hope to see you again soon at a THE campus event.